After a year of the cold shoulder from my tycoon wife, I posted on Facebook, 7 pounds, 6 ounces. Mom and baby are doing great. From now on, my world revolves around you too. Everyone in the group chat was blowing up my phone with congratulations, saying we'd finally been blessed with a son. Right when the excitement was at its peak, I added my gorgeous powerhouse wife to the chat. Don't get the wrong idea. This is the mother. The once lively chat went dead silent, followed by a series of notifications that messages had been retracted. A year ago, I had my lawyer swap out a merger proposal with divorce papers. When I handed them to Chloe to sign, she'd flipped through the pages distractedly, her eyes constantly drifting to Julian in the audience below the stage. I watched her scrawl her signature on the papers with a flourish and gave a bitter smile. She hadn't even noticed what she was signing. It was just like our 3-year marriage, which she had never taken seriously. Only when the clicking of her heels faded down the hall did I finally uncurl my clenched fist. Back home, I went through the house, gathering every gift I'd given Chloe over the past 3 years and packing them neatly into boxes. That included the bottle of perfume, its box now covered in a fine layer of dust. When Chloe got home, she found me in the middle of it all. "What's with the sudden spring cleaning?" she asked. "Don't need them anymore." "I'm donating them," I said without looking up. "Okay," she said, glancing at the boxes before turning and heading for the bathroom without another question. I watched her go, my expression unreadable. If she had just opened one of those boxes, just taken a single look, she would have seen they were filled with every piece of my affection for her. But she didn't. Just like our marriage, she never cared enough to look closer at my feelings or question the meaning behind my actions. The next morning, the donation truck came by. Watching those boxes, filled with the remnants of my love, get hauled away like junk, I felt an unexpected wave of relief. Soon, the divorce would be final and it would all be over. For the next few days, I buried myself in the Sterling Corp merger, the last thing I could do for Chloe before our divorce. The deal went through, and the company's market value soared, which should have been cause for celebration. In the car on the way back into the city, I stared at my tablet, silent. Chloe studied my weary profile, running through the events of the past few weeks, and concluded that the merger must have drained me, leaving me so distracted. After a moment's thought, she said, "Next week is the 1-year anniversary of the merger, and our 3rd wedding anniversary. How about we get away to the Bahamas for a few days?" I kept my eyes on the market trends on my screen. "I haven't been feeling well. Let's not." "What about the Skyline Club, then? Their rooftop restaurant overlooks the entire financial district." "No." She offered a few more suggestions, all of which I shot down with one excuse or another. My complete indifference was a stark contrast to the man whose eyes used to light up at the mere mention of a date. Seeing the confusion on her face, I finally lowered my tablet. "Let's go to the exchange." "The exchange?" Chloe frowned. "Isn't that where you got your start?" I smiled. "I want to see the trading floor one more time." Silence settled over the car again. I opened my calendar. November 7th, the day the divorce would be final. It was not only our wedding anniversary but also the 10th anniversary of the day we first met at the exchange. It seemed a fitting place to end things, bringing it all full circle. "You're not going to stand me up this time, are you?" I asked, half joking. Chloe smiled. "When have I ever stood you up?" I didn't answer, just started a silent tally in my head. There was the time she left me alone at the hospital to help Julian with a merger. The time she missed our company's IPO celebration to help him with an acquisition. And the time she skipped our own restructuring meeting for one of his investor conferences. A week later, autumn sunlight bathed Wall Street. I put on the same navy blue suit I'd worn to the merger signing and left with my camera. Today, I was going to document our final goodbye. Chloe was already waiting for me at the entrance to the building. Seeing how I dressed for the occasion, her mood seemed to lift. "Let's take a lot of pictures," she said. We walked into the exchange, laughing and talking, and I had just started to tell the story of how we first met when her phone rang. "Chloe, I'm at the hospital. There's a problem with the post-restructuring data, the stock is tanking, and the board is..." It was Julian's voice. She froze. I turned just in time to see the conflict on her face. "Trouble?" I asked. "Can we push this back an hour?" she asked quietly, already gathering her things. "No, this is really urgent." I watched her leave in silence, making no move to stop her. I opened my phone, and a Facebook post from Julian popped up on my feed. He was pictured half reclined in a hospital bed, looking pale, while Chloe held a bowl of soup, patiently blowing on it for him. So this was Julian's urgent matter. And as always, he was more important than me. In that moment, everything settled into place. It was all just an excuse to be with him. I looked at the post and laughed. She wouldn't even give me our last half hour together, all for Julian and what was probably just a case of indigestion. I thought of her rushing away and shook my head. Chloe, if you had known this was the last time we'd see each other, would you still have left in such a hurry? No one could give me an answer, and I no longer needed one. I opened my phone and sent a message to Mr. Hayes. Mr. Hayes, the cooling off period ends today. Is there anything else I need to do? His reply was swift. It's all taken care of, Ethan. As of today, you're a free man. Congratulations on your new start. A new start? The word brought a sudden sense of release. So this was what it felt like to let go. It was like setting down a heavy burden, but also like losing all weight, leaving me feeling unsteady on my feet. Back at my office, I began erasing the last traces of my life here. Every memory of us working side by side now had to be packed away. The mug from the first coffee she ever made me still bore the faint trace of her lipstick. The business plan she'd reviewed for the first time, covered in her elegant but firm annotations. The photo of us ringing the opening bell on Wall Street, her smile so radiant as she stood beside me. As I sorted through it all, each object told a story of a time I could never get back. How long is a decade? Long enough for a man's deepest devotion to curdle into a final goodbye. I folded the letter, placing it on the desk beneath my fountain pen. I picked up the bags I'd already packed. This office, a vessel for so many memories, would soon have a new occupant. Chloe, as of now, there are no more ties between us. I hope you get everything you've ever wanted. I walked out and didn't look back. Meanwhile, Chloe had just finished handling the crisis at Julian's company, finally relaxing when she saw his new post. Huge thanks to Chloe for the help. A close call, but we made it through. Driving back, she suddenly remembered our appointment. She called my phone, but it went straight to voicemail. She sent a few texts, but they went unanswered. It was the first time in 3 years she hadn't been able to reach me, and a strange sense of panic began to creep in. She spun the car around and sped toward the office. I had to be there, working late as usual, but when she burst into my office, she found it perfectly tidy, with every trace of me gone. She searched every floor, growing more frantic with each empty room. Defeated, she returned to my office, and that's when she finally saw the letter resting on the desk. The divorce agreement was signed a month ago. As of today, we are both free. I wish you and Julian all the best. May I, too, make the most of the years to come. Every word on the page was a knife twisting in Chloe's heart. Her fingers trembled, and she found it hard to breathe. What did he mean the agreement was signed? What agreement? When? The fountain pen slipped from her grasp, clattering onto a stack of papers on the desk. The document on top was the divorce agreement. Her pupils constricted as her trembling hands flipped to the final page. My signature was there, crisp and clear, and next to it, in the other signature block, was her own. In that instant, a flood of overlooked details rushed back to her. I had orchestrated this entire deception right under her nose, getting her to sign her own divorce papers before vanishing without a trace. A wave of fury and panic washed over her. Chloe snatched the agreement and the pen and ran for the elevator. The door to the law office flew open with a bang, startling Mr. Hayes. "Did you handle this divorce?" Chloe demanded, her voice shaking with an unfamiliar tremor. Mr. Hayes looked up from his desk, stunned to see the city's most formidable financial executive looking so undone. He quickly set down his coffee. "Yes, I handled it. Everything was by the book. Is there a problem?" Chloe stared at the papers, her voice quivering. "Why didn't you tell me?" This was Ethan's divorce. Time seemed to stop. Her mind went blank, the word divorce echoing in the emptiness. 10 years. They had been in each other's lives for 10 years. How had it come to this? His words were like a bucket of ice water dumped over her head. Her mind flooded with images of Ethan waiting for her, alone. All those weekends she'd brushed him off, pleading work, all the warmth she'd taken for granted, now twisted into knives, stabbing at her until she could hardly breathe. She finally registered her own state and instinctively raised a hand to smooth her blazer. It was a familiar gesture, one she'd made countless times in boardrooms and at negotiating tables, her perfect composure her armor. But this time her hand was shaking. The self-possession she prided herself on had vanished. The flawless image she had cultivated her entire life was crumbling. She had been so proud, the youngest CEO at Sterling Corp, a titan of the industry. But she had forgotten that she had never once acted like a wife. And right now, she couldn't bring herself to care about her image. Memories rushed in. She could finally hear the exhaustion that had been in my voice the day she signed the papers. Chloe's hand tightened, crumpling the agreement. She thought back on their life together. After every argument, I had always been the one to yield, but she had never once noticed the sadness in my eyes. "How is this possible?" she whispered, her voice trembling. "How could he?" But another voice inside her screamed back, "How could you have been so blind to his love? How could you have made him wait for so long? Chloe, Mr. Hayes began, unsure what to call this woman who had lost all her light. Why? She looked up, her eyes red. Why would he do this? Tears blurred her vision. All she could see were images of Ethan eating alone, of dates she'd canceled for work, of his disappointed but still smiling face. Mr. Hayes watched the city's most powerful woman look this fragile for the very first time. He remembered how many times Ethan had sat in that very chair, calmly discussing the details of the divorce, and wondered what kind of heartbreak lay beneath that composure. He sighed. Perhaps it's because he waited too long. The words were a dull knife, slowly twisting in Chloe's heart. It was true. He had waited for so long. Waited for a look, a kind word, for her to just put down her phone and talk to him. But she was always busy, chasing the next project, the next merger, never once seeing the man who was waiting for her. She stumbled back and sank onto the leather sofa. All the details she'd ignored were suddenly crystal clear. His voice had been so quiet that day, almost like he was talking to himself. He'd asked if she wanted to read the document, and she had signed it without a second glance. How ironic. Her last chance to save their marriage, and she had thrown it away with her own hand. A silent tear traced a path down her cheek, carrying with it a weight of regret and sorrow that only she could measure. He said, Mr. Hayes offered her a tissue, that it's better to be the one who lets go than the one who gets left behind. At least that way you get to keep some dignity. Chloe's head snapped up. He thought she would abandon him? That day at the exchange, their anniversary, had been his final attempt. He had known all along it would be the last time they saw each other. She had just been too oblivious, only learning the meaning of heartbreak after it was too late. I'm sorry, I got emotional, she said, taking a deep breath. Can you give me his new contact information? Mr. Hayes looked conflicted. Please, she begged, for the first time in her life. Ethan did leave a way to be contacted, Mr. Hayes said, shaking his head slightly. But you work in this world, Chloe. You know I can't violate client confidentiality. Not to mention the non-compete clauses from the merger. Chloe bit her lip until it hurt. She was right. She, who had insisted on keeping their marriage a secret, had no right to demand anything. How is he? She asked, her voice barely a whisper. Mr. Hayes paused. He said that when the time is right, you have to know when to let go. Chloe stood at her floor-to-ceiling window, staring at the gleaming skyscraper across the street that housed Sterling Corp's headquarters, a monument she had built. The sun glinting off the glass facade made her eyes ache. Their offices were meant to be on the top 2 floors. The corner office with the best view had been for him. Now she understood why he'd insisted on redesigning the floor plans, why all the renovations had been rescoped. From the very beginning, he never planned to stay. Night fell, but the lights of the financial district burned as brightly as ever. Chloe had spent countless nights like this, but for the first time, she felt a loneliness that seeped into her bones. From her penthouse office, she stared across at the now dark windows of the Galaxy Tech headquarters, finally understanding what it meant to be worlds apart from someone just across the street. Chloe stared at the divorce agreement on her desk and the single photograph Ethan had left behind. She couldn't tear her eyes away from it, from the focused intensity of his profile. She suddenly recalled so many details she'd overlooked. He was always there, standing just a step behind her like a silent guardian, and she had never once turned around. Her phone buzzed. It was Julian. She looked at the name that once made her heart skip a beat and felt nothing but a strange sense of distance. She let it ring. She started digging through the last month of emails. Every merger document, every project report bore the signs of his careful planning. The papers she'd signed without a thought, the contracts she'd approved without looking up, they were all part of his goodbye. 2 hours ago, full administrative access to the contract management system had automatically transferred to her name. 3 years. From a marriage she'd entered into lightly to a divorce she'd signed by accident. She had never treated any of it with the seriousness it deserved. Ms. Sterling, her assistant said, knocking before entering. The board needs you to review this. Wait, she interrupted. Are we still using Ethan's AI platform? He wiped all the source code before he left. Said it was for data security post-merger. It was another crushing blow. She finally understood what he'd meant when he said, some habits need to be broken. From his code to his heart, he had erased every trace of himself from her life. The plant on her desk, the one they'd picked out together, was still quietly growing. She remembered him saying it was like the market. No matter how brutal the winter, if you could just hold on, spring would eventually come. But this winter felt like one that would never end. Ms. Sterling, her assistant said carefully. Ethan left behind a password for an encrypted file before he left. The password was their wedding date. With a trembling hand, she opened it. It was a block of code, with a single comment, the company's core technology. What kind of man uses his wedding date as a password for a file he leaves behind while planning his escape, still thinking of her future? The tears finally came, hot and unstoppable. Chloe, you fool. Took you 3 years to realize how lucky you were, and now you've destroyed it all with your own 2 hands. Ethan Hayes has transferred all his shares and officially resigned from the board of Galaxy Tech. The news sent shockwaves through the financial world. No one could understand why the company's founder would make a complete exit right after the landmark merger. Chloe stood at the podium of the press conference, fielding a barrage of questions from reporters. Was this a hostile liquidation? Is this a sign of dissatisfaction with the Sterling Corp merger? Will Apex Investments be acquiring the shares? She answered robotically, her eyes fixed on the empty chair in the corner, his seat on the board. After the conference, she had her team gather all the transfer documents. She went through them page by page, realizing he had started planning this a month ago, quietly liquidating his entire stake through various accounts. A report came in from the investment bank's analyst. Galaxy Tech founder's complete exit has shaken market confidence. Downgrade recommended. She smiled bitterly. He had used the most clinical, professional methods to leave her in public, but no one knew that what she'd lost wasn't market cap, but the only person who had ever truly loved her. Behind the cold, hard numbers was a love she had personally destroyed. Mr. Hayes handed her a document. Ethan's final instruction was for me to give you this today. It was a transfer agreement signing over all his tech patents to Sterling Corp, free of charge. It was dated a month ago. He said it was a divorce present, Mr. Hayes added. A fair trade. You're even now. Chloe's fingers trembled. Ethan had always been so decisive, yet he had spent an entire month orchestrating this departure. She finally understood. He hadn't spent a month planning because he was hesitant. He did it to ensure the separation was clean and dignified, just like their marriage, which had always been perfect on the surface. That night, the financial news cycle was dominated by one story: mystery behind Galaxy Tech founder's exit, whereabouts of AI pioneer Ethan Hayes unknown. Sterling Corp releases statement. Chloe leaned back in her chair, trying to pinpoint the exact moment everything had changed. The board restructuring, the stock transfers, the patent handover, every step had been planned with meticulous precision. No, she thought, it must have started even earlier than that. She pulled up the records for every meeting during the merger negotiations, her eyes landing on an investor conference from 6 months ago. The moment Julian had walked into that room, she remembered seeing something break behind Ethan's eyes. For the first time, his warm gaze held an expression she couldn't decipher. Looking back, she realized it was the look of a man who had finally seen the truth and accepted it. At the time, she'd been caught up in the thrill of the deal, excited to have found a kindred spirit in Julian, completely unaware that every spark of her joy was a blow to Ethan. After that day, he had started preparing the handover. Her fingers shook as she opened the project folders on her computer. He had decided to leave back then. All of it, the detailed transition plans, the flawless exit strategy, it was all part of his quiet, dignified departure. Chloe buried her face in her hands, the memories of the past decade swirling around her. 10 years ago, as the rising star of Sterling Corp, she had set her sights on the brilliant, self-made tech founder. She admired his genius, but she had never tried to understand the man himself. While she had once been captivated by Julian's easy charm, in the 3 years since her wedding, she had truly let that old flame die. But faced with Ethan's constant, unwavering gaze, she had always carried a heavy sense of guilt. Perhaps it was that guilt, combined with her parents' pressure, that led her to agree to the marriage in the first place. She had naively believed that giving him a chance was the best way to make things right. She never understood that some things are more painful than unrequited love, like being given a prize you never truly won. She had no idea that for a man who loved her so deeply, a marriage like theirs was the cruelest form of torture. In every negotiation, she fought for the perfect valuation, but she never once stopped to take stock of their relationship. She gave him a marriage certificate, but she never gave him her heart. She thought she was giving him a chance, when in reality, she was wounding him more deeply than she could ever imagine. Staring out into the night, Chloe questioned herself for the very first time. Love isn't a business deal. It isn't about fairness or logic or calculating returns. And yet, she had treated it like one, and in doing so, had hurt the one person she never should have. Maybe the mistake wasn't her choice, but her heart. She had filled every void in her life with work, forgetting that a marriage needs nurturing and love needs to be cherished. And now that he was gone, she realized she had no right to even ask him to come back. As the city lights outside her window began to extinguish one by one, Chloe finally let herself drown in the chaos of her thoughts. Tears blurred her vision. Her legendary decisiveness, the very trait that had made her a success, was utterly worthless now. Day 3. Time seemed to have frozen. Every minute stretched into an eternity. Chloe stared at her phone, at the familiar number that still went straight to voicemail. She'd lost count of how many times she'd called, only to be met with the same cold, robotic message that crushed her hope a little more each time. Outside, the sky darkened, mirroring the panic that was slowly consuming her. A feeling of helplessness washed over her, slow and inexorable like a rising tide. The coffee on the table was cold. A dozen messages from Julian sat unread on her phone. She didn't know how to face him, or more accurately, where to even begin explaining. And then he was standing right in front of her. The familiar face that had once made her heart race now left her feeling completely calm. "You look like you haven't slept in days," Julian said, his voice filled with a familiar concern that no longer stirred anything inside her. Chloe looked up at the face she had once obsessed over, and in that moment, all the turmoil inside her settled. So this is what it felt like to truly move on. It was like a chronic pain suddenly vanishing, leaving behind only a dull exhaustion. "Do you know where Ethan is?" she asked, her voice hoarse. The question had been haunting her for so long she was starting to lose hope. "Ethan?" Julian's voice held a flicker of something she couldn't quite place. "I've been looking for him," she said, her own voice sounding distant. All the sleepless nights, the longing, the suffocating guilt, were poured into those 4 words. He set his cup down, the clink of porcelain sharp in the quiet office. The sound was jarring in the silence. Julian's hand paused. "Is this about the stock transfer?" "It's about me," she said. 2 simple words that held a world of regret. She watched the tea leaves settle at the bottom of her cup and gave a small, humorless laugh. "Did you know we were married for 3 years?" The office fell into a dead silence, a quiet so profound it felt like a physical blow. Julian's breath caught in his throat. He couldn't speak. He remembered the look Ethan had given him at the club that day. It hadn't been his imagination. There had been a universe of meaning in that gaze that he had completely failed to understand. "Why?" he finally managed. "Because I was a coward," she cut him off. Too scared to face it, too scared to admit it, too scared. Her words trailed off into a sigh. The tea was cold now, just like the moments between them that were lost forever. "That day," Julian said suddenly, "he asked me if I was in love with you." The words shattered Chloe's last defense. Her fingers trembled as a painful fist clenched around her heart. "I told him I didn't know. He just smiled and said it didn't matter, because it was already—" The unfinished sentence hung in the air, a fog of possibilities. Already what? Too late? Over? He'd already let go? "I thought I'd hidden it so well," she whispered, her voice thick with bitterness. A tear fell silently, blooming into a dark spot on the polished wood of the desk. All her carefully constructed pretenses, so transparent to the one person who had truly loved her. Julian stood up and walked to the door, pausing before he left. "He didn't disappear, Chloe," he said quietly. "You just never really saw him." The words were a final, crushing blow to the lies she had been telling herself. The door clicked shut, leaving Chloe alone in the vast, empty office. She watched the darkness outside swallow the city, and a tidal wave of regret crashed over her, pulling her under. She finally understood. The cruelest way to hurt someone wasn't with hate, but by simply refusing to see their love. For years, she had let the most precious person in her life suffer while she clung to a ghost. By the 7th day of Ethan's absence, Chloe had hit a wall. She had checked every place she could think of and called everyone she knew, but there was no sign of him. The helplessness was crushing her. But just as she hit rock bottom, a strange calm washed over her. A single, rational thought cut through the panic. Even with the cooling-off period over, the divorce wasn't technically final. Whether it was to sign the final papers or to go to court, he would have to show his face eventually. The thought was a sliver of light in her despair. This was her last chance. With this new resolve, she pulled herself together. The first thing she did was go straight to Mr. Hayes' office. He had been relaying her desperate messages to Ethan for weeks, and each non-response had been another thorn in her side. Seeing her exhausted face, Mr. Hayes was about to offer some words of comfort, but she spoke first. "Please tell Ethan," she said, her voice unnervously calm, as if she'd finally accepted the worst, "that I agree to the divorce. Tell him to come back so we can finalize it." She said the words so casually, but they took every ounce of courage she had left. Mr. Hayes nearly spilled his coffee. "You're just giving up? After everything you two built over 3 years?" He could see the toll the decision was taking on her. "He won't talk to me. What else can I do?" She managed a smile, a bitter, helpless thing. "I can't exactly drag him to court, can I?" Only she knew the pain hidden behind that smile. Back in her office, she sank into her leather chair, the tension finally leaving her body. It was a gambit, of course. All she wanted was to see him just once. If he came back, she would have a chance to say everything she'd left unsaid, to show him what was truly in her heart. A decade of history had to count for something, right? There had to be a chance to fix this. The thought was the only thing keeping her going. Meanwhile, I was on a beach, soaking up the sun. I'd spent the week traveling, moving through 3 different cities, seeing new sights, trying to forget. But everywhere I went, the same thought would surface. What would this be like if she were here with me? I crushed the thought each time it appeared. Then the message from Mr. Hayes arrived. She's agreed to the divorce. The words were a shock to my system, shattering my carefully constructed peace. I stared at the screen, a sudden unease settling in my stomach. Why would the woman who had been relentlessly trying to contact me for weeks suddenly give in? Chloe wasn't one to admit defeat. To be safe, I asked Hayes about the process. He confirmed both parties had to be present to sign, otherwise it would mean going to court. I sighed. All I wanted was a clean break. Why was it so hard? The years we'd spent together, the shared history, had become an anchor I couldn't seem to cut loose. I looked at the rest of my travel itinerary and, with a pang of regret, canceled it. The beautiful places I'd planned to see couldn't compete with the messy reality I had to face. The next morning, I landed back in New York, the familiar city air filling my lungs. My assistant was waiting for me, and his eyes widened when he saw me. "Ethan, you're so tan." My tan was evidence of my escape. "It's a healthy glow," I joked, a rare attempt at humor to mask my unease. But the light-hearted feeling vanished the moment her name came up. "I don't care if she's being sincere or if this is another game. I'm finishing this," I said. "If she backs out, we'll go to court." "That could take a long time," he pointed out. "I know," I said, gazing out the window, the weariness evident in my voice. "That's why I came back, to get it over with." On a late September morning, Chloe received a text, 9 a.m., the Ritz-Carlton lobby. The few short words made her heart pound. After a month of waiting, she was finally going to see him. She arrived 30 minutes early and chose a seat by the large windows. Sunlight streamed in, illuminating the freshly printed copy of the divorce agreement in her hands. Every word was a painful glare. She had signed this with her own hand, and now it felt like a knife in her heart. At 8:55, the elevator doors opened. I walked straight toward her, my gaze fixed ahead. A month away had left me tanner, my features more defined. It was the face she had longed to see, but now it wore an expression of unfamiliarity that made her ache. "Did you bring your ID?" I asked, sitting down across from her. My tone was as level as if we were discussing a business deal. The distance in my voice was a physical pain for her. When had the gentle man she knew become so cold? Chloe looked up, searching my eyes for any trace of the warmth that used to be there. "That's the first thing you say to me after a month?" she asked, a tremor in her voice she didn't even notice. "What else?" I said, tugging at my tie, the familiar gesture now feeling stiff and foreign. "You want to make small talk about the weather? Can we please talk?" she pleaded, trying to grasp at this one last chance. "We can talk after the papers are signed." I cut her off, my voice leaving no room for argument. The man who had once given her everything she wanted had finally learned to say no. "I didn't bring my ID," she heard herself say, her voice sounding faint and distant. "Then we'll do this another day." I stood, my movements as graceful as ever, but utterly devoid of warmth. "Please." She grabbed my wrist, the warmth of her touch almost bringing tears to her eyes. "Just let me explain." The word was forced from her, something she had never said before. The proud queen of Wall Street was finally begging. Her touch made me freeze. I looked down at her hand on my wrist as if it were a foreign object. For a split second, I felt myself waver, but the coldness returned just as quickly. "Chloe," I said, slowly pulling my hand away, my voice turning to ice. "It's the most basic rule of business. A missed opportunity is gone forever. You're just wasting both our time now." Every word was a calculated strike, aimed right where I knew it would hurt the most. "Ethan!" She cried out his name, her voice filled with a desperate longing. "Stop the performance," I said, turning to leave. "We're both busy people. Let's just meet at the courthouse next time." The words were a death sentence for whatever was left between us. "But if we don't finalize it within 30 days, she started, trying one last time, but I cut her off again. "Don't quote legal statutes at me," I said, stopping but not turning around, my voice tight with a pain I couldn't hide. "You don't love me, so why are you dragging this out? Are you unhappy with the settlement?" The sun was still shining, but it couldn't reach the cold place inside her. Watching my retreating back, Chloe finally understood that some things, once you lose them, are gone for good. Outside the windows of the Ritz-Carlton, the city's neon lights began to glow. The shifting patterns of light and shadow mirrored the chaos in her mind. Chloe stared into her coffee and spoke, her voice softer and more vulnerable than I had ever heard it. Ethan, what is it you really want? The proud woman I knew was gone, replaced by someone pleading. A divorce, I said. Hearing the coldness in my voice, Chloe tried again. I don't mean anything by it. I just what? My voice was a blade, severing whatever hope she had left. I just want to understand how we got here, she said, looking up at me, her eyes begging for an answer. All of her unspoken feelings, all her regrets, were packed into that one question. I stared at her for a long moment, surprised. This woman, who was invincible in the boardroom, looked utterly fragile. For a second, my resolve wavered, but then the memory of all those lonely nights came rushing back. Understand what? I scoffed, my voice dripping with coldness. You chose Apex Investments. You chose Julian. Isn't that clear enough? Each word was a stone, reinforcing the wall around my heart. It wasn't like that, she insisted, her knuckles white as she clenched her fists. You've misunderstood. Her explanation was years too late to heal the wounds she'd inflicted. A misunderstanding? I cut her off, my voice colder still. I'm just stating the facts. All those nights I waited alone, the unguarded looks in her eyes when she spoke of him, that was all the proof I needed. And in that moment, Chloe finally understood. All of my cold resolve, all of this, was built on a misunderstanding she had never bothered to clear up. She took a deep breath, fighting to keep her voice steady. I read your letter. You think I'm still in love with Julian, don't you? Aren't you? My question hit its mark, and a bitter pain filled her heart. The feelings she thought she had hidden so perfectly had been transparent to me all along. She forced herself to meet my gaze. I'm sorry. It's my fault. I should have been honest with you a long time ago. I was the one who kept avoiding it, and I let you believe the worst for all this time. Every word was laced with regret, but some mistakes can't be unmade. There's nothing more to say. I stood and straightened my jacket, as if brushing away any lingering emotion. You've made your choice. Let's just end this amicably. As I turned to leave, she spoke again, her voice raw with a sincerity I'd never heard before. I truly wanted to spend the rest of my life with you. The words seemed to take everything she had. I stopped. I turned back, studying her face, trying to gauge if she was telling the truth. In that brief hesitation, she saw a flicker of hope. You know, I said with a bitter laugh, the worst lies aren't the ones you tell other people. They're the ones you tell yourself. Do you actually believe what you just said? The coldness in my eyes hurt her, but she pressed on. From the day Julian got married, I was done. You gave me a home. You showed me what warmth felt like. What? She wanted to say love, but the word wouldn't come. I cut her off again, my voice heavy with an exhaustion that went bone deep. It's a good performance, Chloe, but it's too late. Julian's single now. You two are perfect for each other. Why are you so certain? She began, her voice laced with despair, but she couldn't finish. Because I was watching, I said, my gaze turning to the city lights outside, my eyes filled with a pain she would never understand. For 3 years, Chloe, you never once looked at me. What's your greatest skill? I asked her suddenly. The question was a surprise attack, a blade straight to the heart. Chloe was taken aback. What? She asked, a knot of anxiety tightening in her stomach as she saw the hard look on my face. Investment analysis, I answered for her, my voice dripping with sarcasm. You're an expert at seeing the true value of a company. But you looked at me for 3 years and never saw who I really was. The words made her flinch. She finally realized that this cold, sarcastic man was the real Ethan. The gentle, accommodating husband had just been a role I played to keep our marriage alive. I know I have no right to say anything, she said, her voice filled with a useless regret. It's too late for words. I picked up my coffee but looked out the window. Anything was more interesting to me now than she was. You of all people should know. You don't get second chances. Not in business and not with people. Chloe looked at my profile, and her heart clenched with a sharp pain. This man was a stranger, nothing like the one who had always indulged her every whim. The warm smile and patient gaze she remembered were gone, replaced by a cold emptiness. But then she thought, which one was the real him? How could a titan of the tech industry, a man who built an empire, be so mild-mannered? For 3 years, he had suppressed his true nature, all to preserve a marriage he thought was worth saving. And her? She had taken it all for granted. The late nights he'd waited up, the quiet ways he'd shown he cared, the frustrations he'd swallowed. She had ignored it all. Worse, she had actively twisted the knife, using work as an excuse to avoid him, using Julian to slowly erode his faith in them. The realization cut her to the core. She could feel her own blood pounding in her ears, each heartbeat a throb of pain. All his patience, all his compromises, were just the price he paid to keep their marriage afloat. A bitter taste filled her mouth. How much had he endured over 3 years, forcing his brilliant, sharp-edged personality into the gentle mold she expected? It wasn't that she hadn't seen it, she had simply chosen not to look. She took his devotion for granted and used her connection with Julian to chip away at his confidence, until nothing was left. Every flicker of concern for her old flame, every time her mood shifted at the mention of his name, was another tick of the bomb she had placed at the heart of their marriage. The truth was a scalpel, laying her heart bare. Pain radiated through every nerve, leaving her breathless. The warmth she thought was infinite, the patience she took for granted, she had destroyed it all herself. "Chloe, make sure you bring all the paperwork next time." I stood up, my voice detached. "And when we meet again, don't bother with any more excuses." She had pushed away the one person she should have held on to, and now she was foolishly trying to pull him back. Her voice shook as she swallowed her pride. "Ethan, can you just give me a little more time?" She bit her lip. "Let me prove." "Chloe," I cut her off, my voice like ice. "Prove what? You've already wasted 3 years of my life. Don't waste any more of mine or yours." Chloe watched his straight back as he walked away and felt a desperate urge to ask him how he had endured it all for 3 years. But she had lost the right to ask. This was all her doing. She was the one who had driven their love into the ground. I glanced back and saw Chloe leaning against the doorframe, looking like she was about to collapse. I narrowed my eyes. Who was this performance for? "Feeling unwell?" I asked, walking back toward her, my voice dripping with skepticism. I'd seen her act her way through too many business deals to fall for it. This display of weakness was just another negotiation tactic. Chloe heard the doubt in my voice, and a bitter look crossed her face. She shook her head and straightened up. "We don't have to wait. The papers are in my car. Let's go finalize this today." She gave me a bitter smile. "Shall we?" Seeing her push the door open, I let my guard down and followed her. The elevator ride was silent, so quiet I could hear both of us breathing. I kept checking my watch, anxious not to be late, and she flinched at my obvious eagerness to be done with her. When we got out of the car, I grabbed her wrist and pulled her along. The sudden contact made Chloe's heart skip a beat, reminding her of another day, 3 years ago. I had been just as eager then, holding her hand tightly as if I was afraid she'd back out. She had been lost in her own thoughts that day, only snapping out of it to laugh at my nervousness, which had lowered her defenses. Who could have imagined that the same two people would be back here today to sign it all away? All the warmth she had taken for granted, all the love she had ignored, now coalesced into a single, profound regret. Watching the couples coming and going from the courthouse, she suddenly thought that maybe an ending wasn't so bad after all. If I was so convinced this was all a mistake, then this was where it would end. She wouldn't force me to stay, but from this day forward, she would be there for me, just in a different way. This time, it was her turn to do the chasing. I might not give her the same chance she once gave me, but that was okay. She was willing to wait another 10 years, a lifetime if she had to, because when she'd said, "I do," she had meant it, even if she'd only realized too late that love isn't a given. It's something you have to work for. By the time we finished, it was rush hour. I looked down at the divorce certificate in my hand and let out a long, relieved breath. The sound of my relief was a knife in her heart, but it only hardened her resolve. "Well, thanks for the last 3 years. See you around," I said, turning to leave, the relief evident in my voice. "Who said anything about seeing me around?" she said, grabbing my arm. This time, she wasn't letting go. I glanced from the certificate in my hand back to her face, confused. "It's not over? Our marriage is over," she said, her voice steady and sure. "But that's not the only relationship we have. What other relationship could we possibly have?" I scoffed, my sarcasm unconcealed. "For starters, we're still in the same business," she said, meeting my gaze with a new and unnerving intensity. "And I remember you saying that, after the divorce, everything was on the table for discussion." I did say that, but only to get her to sign the papers without a fight. I never thought she'd actually take me at my word. The woman who never backed down from a fight was now showing that same stubbornness with me. "I said it, but I didn't say right now," I said with a shrug, trying to sound casual to hide my growing unease. "Some other time." "When is some other time?" she asked, not letting go of my arm, her voice holding a tenacity I'd never heard before. "So you can just disappear again without a word, like last time?" Her words hit their mark. I couldn't meet her eyes. All those weeks I'd spent avoiding her, all the late-night moments of weakness, were laid bare by that one question. "You changed all your contact information. Anyway," she continued, her voice devoid of emotion, "if we didn't work in the same industry, I'd never have been able to find you at all." Every word was a precise incision, cutting through my defenses. I felt a pang of guilt. She was right. I had done it more than once. Every time I thought of her, my first instinct was to run, as if I could outrun the feelings themselves. "Does your word mean so little?" she asked, and I could hear the slight tremble in her voice. I frowned, my voice growing colder. "Are you questioning me?" I raised my defenses out of habit, but her next words disarmed me completely. "I wouldn't dare," she said with a small smile. "I'm just reminding you of something you once taught me. A man is only as good as his word." Her words left me speechless. She had turned my own advice into a weapon against me, and I had no defense. I took a deep breath and finally gave in. "Fine. What do you want to talk about?" "I hear you're moving to London," she said, her voice quiet but clear. "Are you running away from me?" The question landed like a hammer blow. My hand faltered, and my cup clinked against the marble table. I looked up, my eyes sharp. "Is this an interrogation?" "Just concern," she said with a small smile. "We've known each other a long time. We should at least have a proper goodbye." "Proper?" I scoffed, the sarcasm thick in my voice. "Saying goodbye on the courthouse steps wasn't proper enough for you?" My sarcasm didn't faze her. Instead, she took a step closer. "If it was so proper, then why are you running away from me? All the way across the ocean?" Her words were a needle, finding the exact point of my pain. I shot to my feet, my voice tight with anger. "I am not running." "Oh," she said, tilting her head. "Then why the rush to leave?" The cafe was silent, save for the shifting colors of the neon signs outside, which painted moving shadows across our faces. All the things left unsaid, all the repressed emotions, hung in the air between us. "You've got good sources," I said with a cold laugh. "But it has nothing to do with you anymore." I tried to sound final. "You're right, it doesn't," she agreed. "But were you just going to leave without saying anything?" I scowled. "Do I need to report my travel plans to you now?" "I'm not trying to cling to you," she said, shaking her head. "I just think there are things that need to be said." "I thought I made myself perfectly clear earlier today," I said, my voice turning colder. "Today? You said what you think?" Chloe said, smoothing her jacket and stepping in front of me, forcing me to look at her. "Chloe, you can't possibly think I still care, do you?" I tried to look unaffected, but I couldn't meet her gaze. Autumn in New York is unpredictable. Just as I turned to leave, the heavens opened up. Rain fell in sheets, as if trying to wash away every last bit of feeling between us. Chloe saw my frustration and smiled, a flicker of warmth in her eyes. "Looks like rain. Did you drive?" she asked, though she already knew the answer. "Took the subway," I snapped, my irritation obvious. "It'll be impossible to get a cab in this," she said, her voice soft. "I can give you a ride if you don't mind." I didn't respond, just turned and walked toward the door, only to stop short at the wall of rain. "It's a downpour out there," she said from behind me, a smile in her voice. "But if you want to get soaked, be my guest." I stood there, hesitating. Chloe watched my back, a small smile playing on her lips. He was still the same stubborn man with a soft heart. Some habits, some kindnesses were just too deeply ingrained. The car was quiet, the only sound the drumming of rain on the windshield. The rain hammered against the roof, a frantic rhythm like a song of longing. In the small, enclosed space, our breathing seemed unnaturally loud. The air was thick with everything we weren't saying. Chloe watched the rain stream down the glass and smiled. "Do you remember our first date?" she asked, her voice soft with nostalgia. "Don't," I said, my voice sharp. "It's pointless." "It was raining just like this," she continued, as if she hadn't heard me. "You forgot your umbrella, so you took off your jacket and held it over my head. You caught a fever the next day, but you told me you didn't regret it." The memory, warm and sweet, landed in my heart like a drop of rain. My fingers tightened on the door handle. The past I had tried so hard to bury was rushing back, and my heart began to beat erratically. I tried to push it away, but every detail was perfectly clear. "Chloe," I said, taking a deep breath, my voice a clear warning. "We're divorced." "I know," she said, her voice calm, "but a divorce doesn't erase the past, Ethan. Does it just negate everything? All the good memories, all the times that were real." The car was silent for a moment, the sound of the rain suddenly loud. I turned to her, my gaze sharp. "What's your point?" "My point," she said, meeting my eyes with a new, unwavering confidence, "is that you say you don't care, but you still have the pocket watch I gave you. You say you want a clean break, but you remember I'm scared of storms. You say you never want to see me again, but you got in my car." Her questions were a volley of arrows, each one finding its mark. I looked away, my voice hoarse. "It's just habit." The excuse sounded weak even to my own ears. "Is it?" she asked with a small laugh. "Do you know what my habits are?" Before I could answer, she went on. "I have a habit of not giving up. When I was starting out on Wall Street, everyone told me I'd fail, but I didn't quit. It's the same now. I don't give up on people I believe in. I whipped my head around to face her, but her gaze was resolute. The sound of the rain seemed to fade into the background. All I could hear was her voice, soft but firm. Give me a chance, Ethan, and give yourself one, too. Please. No, I said after a long silence. You've always been like this, Chloe. When you were with me, you couldn't get over Julian. Now that we're divorced, you're chasing me. I let out a cold, cruel laugh. Is it only after you've lost something that you decide you want it, Chloe? The light turned red, and Chloe slammed on the brakes. I moved faster than she expected. Before she could stop me, I had the car door open. I heard her desperate cry behind me, but her words were cut off by the slam of the door. I already had a flight booked for the next day. I'd arranged it before I even flew back. My immigration papers were already processed. I had decided before I returned that no matter what happened, whether she agreed or not, I wasn't wasting another minute on her. Even if she dragged it out, even if she took me to court, I had a plan. I would leave it all in Mr. Hayes' hands. The street was deserted in the storm, the trees bending in the wind. I ducked into a small diner to wait out the rain and saw the last person I ever expected to see. Julian. He looked worse than I'd ever seen him, haggard and exhausted. A waiter brought him a cup of tea, but he just stared into the rising steam, lost in thought. He didn't look up until he heard my footsteps. Mr. Hayes, he said, recognizing me instantly and getting to his feet, looking awkward. Ethan is fine, I said, taking the seat across from him and signaling for another tea. I studied him, taking in his disheveled appearance. He was a shadow of the confident, charismatic man I remembered. Neither of us was much of a talker, so we sat in silence for a moment, the diner's soft music filling the space between us. A couple at the next table was laughing quietly, making our silence feel even more awkward. Julian was the one who finally broke it. Ethan, I've been meaning to find you. I wanted to apologize. Apologize? I raised an eyebrow, tapping my finger against my cup. For what? That night at the bar, I didn't know you and Chloe were. I said a lot of things I shouldn't have, he said, his voice full of guilt, his eyes refusing to meet mine. I'm truly sorry. I watched him for a moment. We were the ones who kept it a secret. You couldn't have known. No, it's more than that. His fingers tightened, and his cup rattled in its saucer. I've known for a long time that Chloe had feelings for me, but I pretended I didn't. Then, when my own marriage was falling apart, she was the one who helped me through it. For a while, I let myself believe she was still in love with me. I even started to have ideas I shouldn't have. So what are you now? I cut in, my gaze sharp. Julian looked startled, then gave a bitter smile. She's like my sister. That's all we can ever be. He looked up, meeting my eyes directly. I can feel it. She's changed. Maybe she doesn't even realize it herself, but she's moved on from me. The way she looks at me now, it's like how she'd look at a little brother. Then why didn't you stop the divorce? I asked, my voice cold. Because by the time I figured it out, it was too late, he said, his voice thick with emotion. It was only when I saw her searching for you, like a crazy person, that I realized she's in love with you. I haven't been the one for a long time. Ethan, you have no idea. She's lost so much weight, she's a wreck. I've never seen her like this. Not even when I got married was she this broken up. My fingers stilled on my cup. A flicker of something I couldn't name crossed my mind. You're sure about that? Absolutely, he said, his voice earnest. Ethan, give her a chance. Give yourself a chance. Don't let a misunderstanding destroy something you both worked so hard to build. Besides, he added after a pause, do you really not care about her at all? I didn't answer right away. Outside, the afternoon sun cast long shadows across our table. I stared into my cold tea, my mind a million miles away. You don't believe me? Julian asked quietly. Looking at me then, he suddenly understood why the proud Chloe was so determined. He saw that my true nature was rational and extreme, and that for 3 years, I had forced myself into the mold of a gentle, patient man, all for her. It's not that I don't believe you, I finally said after a long silence, my voice low. It's just that when it comes to feelings, nothing is ever that simple. My words were heavy with the weariness of someone who had been disappointed too many times. You doubt that she's sincere? Julian asked, looking at me with confusion. To him, Chloe's change of heart was obvious. I gave a bitter smile, full of resentment. If the heart was so easy to read, the world wouldn't be so full of regret. All those years of waiting, of being let down, were contained in that one sigh. But Ethan, Julian leaned forward, his voice sincere, you can't fake something like this. After you left, she was looking for you day and night. That doesn't prove anything, I said quietly. Then tell me what does, he challenged, looking me straight in the eye. His question hit its mark and I had no answer. I was so used to being ignored by Chloe. This relentless pursuit was something I had never experienced in the decade I'd known her. I pressed my lips together, unable to form a rebuttal. "Let go of your pride, Ethan," Julian said, his voice quiet but every word landing with force. "The rarest thing is when two people both want the same thing. You both still care. Why not give it another chance?" "It's over," I said, my voice hoarse. "Is it?" he asked with a faint, sad smile. "Then why can't you look me in the eye when you talk about her? Stop lying to yourself, Ethan. You're not over her." I shot to my feet, my chair scraping loudly against the floor. The emotions I had buried so deep threatened to overflow. I took a sharp breath. "We're done here. Thank you for being honest. But the rest of this is between me and her, and it's none of your business." "Wait," Julian said, standing as well. "Just one last question." I stopped, my heart starting to pound. "If you had known then that I was just like a brother to her, would you still have divorced her?" My conversation with Julian stayed with me, a seed of doubt planted in my mind. In the VIP lounge at the airport, I stood at the window watching planes take off and land, my thoughts a tangled mess. Each plane seemed to carry my thoughts away, only for them to circle back to the memories I was trying to escape. "Ethan, your ticket and visa are all set," my assistant said, handing me a folder. He hesitated. "Are you sure about this? You're really not coming back?" I took the folder without a word. I would never admit it, but he was right. I was running away. I needed to get away, to find a place where I could think clearly. But I couldn't deny the part of me that didn't want to go. My assistant was the only one there to see me off. As I walked toward the VIP security line, his voice followed me. "Remember to eat properly. Don't work too hard. Call me if you need anything at all. I'm going to London, not a deserted island," I said, exasperated. "You don't have to worry so much. The last time you went on a business trip, I didn't hear from you for a week. I almost filed a missing persons report. You're going to be gone for a year this time. Of course I'm worried." I couldn't help but smile. That was the merger. I was busy. It was true. I had buried myself in work on that trip, trying to forget. "That's why I'm telling you now," he said, his tone serious. "Don't just lock yourself away in an office. Remember to, time to board," I said, cutting him off and heading for the security gate. His words were reminding me of too many things I wanted to forget. After clearing security, I took off my watch to put it in the bin, and I caught a glimpse of a familiar silhouette out of the corner of my eye. My heart skipped a beat. I whipped my head around, but it was just a crowd of strangers. I must have imagined it. Still, I found myself sending a text to my assistant. "What's Chloe been up to?" I didn't even realize I was asking out of concern. "Ms. Sterling resigned yesterday," he replied. "I heard she's moving to London for a new opportunity, but I don't know the details." My heart hammered in my chest. That familiar, unsettling feeling was back. I hurried to my gate and boarded the plane. As I was looking for my seat, I heard a voice I knew all too well. "Excuse me." I froze. Slowly, I turned, and my eyes met hers. She was smiling. In that instant, time stopped, and the new life I was running toward crumbled around me. Chloe stood in the aisle behind me, a look of perfect surprise on her face. "Fancy meeting you here," she said. Her tone was casual, but my heart was pounding. "What are you doing here?" I asked, my voice cold as I tried to mask the shock. "Going to London," she said, holding up her ticket. "Same flight as you, what are the odds?" She had the triumphant smile of a hunter who had just cornered her prey. I glanced at her seat number and knew this was no coincidence. This woman never gave up on anything she wanted. The cabin was quiet. Chloe turned to look at me. I had my eyes closed, pretending to sleep, but the slight furrow of my brow and the flutter of my eyelashes gave me away. She thought back to 3 years ago, right after they were married. He had been the same way then. When she came home late from work, he would pretend to be reading on the sofa, but she knew he was really just waiting for her. And she had always ignored it, even made excuses to avoid his attention. Now she realized that all those small kindnesses, those patient looks, all the hope she had ignored, had slowly hardened into the cold resolve he showed her today. Chloe looked away and sighed. If he wouldn't listen now, she would just have to wait. This time, it was her turn to wait for him. The flight passed quickly. By the time we landed in London, the sun was just beginning to rise. Chloe followed a few steps behind me as I grabbed my bag and headed for the exit. She kept pace with me, her eyes fixed on my back, a sight she had ignored for years, but now couldn't look away from. "Ethan," she called out, just as I was about to get into a cab. I stopped but didn't turn around. "We've said everything there is to say. Are you going to follow me forever?" My voice was sharp, but it didn't seem to affect her resolve. She stepped closer. "No, we can talk about the last 3 years and then we can be even. But what about the 7 years before that? And what about the rest of our lives? We still have things to talk about. What's there to talk about? I scoffed. I wasted 7 years of my life chasing you, and now we're supposed to just go our separate ways. End of story. My voice was level, but it couldn't hide the pain underneath. Chloe watched him, and her mind drifted back to a night 10 years ago. She was standing outside the library, and the boy who kept accidentally running into her was shyly confessing his feelings. She had simply said, "Thank you," and walked away. She thought that would be the end of it, but he had stubbornly replied, "You don't like me yet, but the future isn't written. Don't be so sure, Chloe." She had dismissed it as a boy's pride, and had even laughed to herself about it. But now, she realized that the memory of his persistent figure in the darkness, of his stubborn promise, had been etched into her memory all along. "The past is the past," she said, echoing his own words back to him. "But the future isn't written. Don't be so sure, Ethan." Her words struck me to the core. I spun around to face her, searching her face for any sign that she was joking. But her gaze was steady and clear in the morning light, and in her eyes, I saw a promise to make up for 7 years of neglect and 3 years of distance with the rest of her life. Years ago, she had ended our story with a single, dismissive thank you. She never imagined that this stubborn man would spend the next 7 years, through countless chance encounters and with endless patience, slowly erasing that finality. Their marriage had started abruptly and ended just as decisively, but it was in those 3 years that she had finally seen him and herself clearly. All the tenderness she'd been blind to, the hope she'd ignored, the love she'd never returned, had become a constant, sharp ache in her chest since he'd left. The sun grew brighter, casting a soft glow around them. Chloe watched the hard line of his jaw soften, and she knew he was wavering. She knew him too well, knew his pride and his stubbornness. This time, she would be the one to wait. She would wait longer than 7 years if she had to, with more patience than he had ever shown her, to finish their story. Chloe lowered her gaze, her voice soft. "Ethan, don't say no just yet. Let's make a bet." "What kind of bet?" I frowned. "If I can find you by midnight tonight," she said, looking me straight in the eye, "you have to grant me one request." I scoffed. "You think that's possible?" "Let's find out," she said with a slight smile. "You've got nothing to lose, right? And if you lose?" "If I lose," she said, her voice quiet but firm, "you'll never see me again." I stared at her for a long moment, trying to read her. Finally, I nodded. "Deal." As I turned to walk away, I asked, "You seem pretty confident you're going to win." "You don't need to worry about it," she said. As Chloe walked away, she wondered where her own confidence had come from. The cold London wind seemed to blow away the last of her bravado. The city was huge. What were the chances of finding one person who was determined not to be found? On the 9 o'clock bus, she stared out at the blur of neon lights, her fingers tapping an anxious rhythm against the railing. Where would he go? A hotel? A cafe? Or? An idea suddenly struck her, and she rang the bell to get off. The lights were still on in the cafe. She pushed open the door and her eyes immediately went to his usual table. It was empty, except for a half-finished coffee. As a waiter moved to clear the table, she stopped him. "Excuse me, the man who was sitting here, when did he leave?" "He said he wouldn't be back," the waiter replied. Her heart sank. She glanced at her watch. 11:40. Her pulse quickened. This was her last chance. She ran through the empty streets, the sound of her heels echoing in the night. People turned to stare, but she didn't notice. As she rounded a corner, she heard a beautiful melody drifting from a music shop. It was the nocturne he always played, but this time it sounded different, more final. He was standing at a crosswalk, watching the timer count down. Panic seized her, and tears blurred her vision. But she made it. At 11:59, Chloe pushed open the door to the practice room. The music stopped abruptly. The person at the piano looked up, and in the instant their eyes met, Chloe's world fell apart. It wasn't Ethan. The stranger looked at her, closed the piano lid without a word, picked up an umbrella from the corner, and walked out. Chloe stood alone in the empty room. The piano sat silently in the moonlight, and on top of it was a single, solitary cell phone. She had installed a tracker on my phone. That was the source of her confidence. And now she knew she had lost, utterly and completely. "Ethan," she whispered, her voice breaking, "I never knew you could be so cruel." The sound of the rain outside faded as tears streamed down her face. She leaned against the piano, her mind lost in a past she could never get back. She stared out into the night, her voice choked with sobs. "I was so stupid. I knew you were leaving, but I still held on to this tiny sliver of hope. I thought if I just tried hard enough, I could find you. But," the tears finally came, "you wouldn't even give me a chance to say goodbye." The clock struck midnight, and the only sound in the room was her quiet sobbing. The woman who had conquered Wall Street was now curled in a corner like a lost child. "Ethan," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "I was wrong. You were never going to London." The rain had stopped. In the silence of the room, the brokenness in her voice was magnified. "How could I forget? You always hated the rain, and it's always raining in London." As the plane climbed above the clouds, the golden sunlight washed over my face. I didn't have to see Chloe's despair to imagine it, but it didn't matter anymore. I didn't care. I knew why she had been so confident. She had installed a tracker on my phone the last time we'd met. Chloe had always been so sure of herself, so certain that this whole chase was just another one of our games. But I was tired of her games. I knew that seeing that phone, left behind on the piano, would break her, and I didn't care. I had spent years being the man she wanted me to be. From now on, I was going to be myself. I breathed a cloud of fog onto the window and traced the word goodbye with my finger. I wasn't saying goodbye to Chloe, but to the tamed man I had forced myself to be. From now on, I wouldn't have to compromise or suppress who I was for anyone. This time, I could finally be the real Ethan.